Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Writer's Chat. Today, we have a special guest with us. I'm here with my co-host, Johnnie Alexander and Jean Wise, and we meet every Tuesday, so we hope that you'll be able to join us in the future. We always record our shows, so if you can't, you'll be able to watch them on YouTube on our channel, Serious Writer. I'm going to let my co-host, Jean Wise, introduce our guest because our guest today is super special, and she's so excited to introduce us. Introduce her. So, Jean, please tell us about our special guest.
Thanks, Brandy. It is pretty special today, but this is also a special day. It's the day after Valentine's Day. We were just talking about that before we started the recording, and we don't want the romance and the love to die. No, so how can we keep using that? How can we write with love and romance and build it into all our genres? And we've got an expert with us, one of our good friends, Johnnie Alexander. And I'm one of the few in this group who can say this. I knew her when, didn't I? Pre-publication of anything, Johnnie. I think of anything she got. I knew her as the newbie and not sure even what she wanted to write. And we met and we've talked about the value of writers' conferences, that you discover not only do you learn, but you find a community and you develop lifelong friendships. And I consider Johnnie one of my lifelong friends on that. And something else, and then I'll start her formal intro and then let her take over. Did you know she likes to hide donuts? If you haven't watched Bethany's Instagram story from yesterday, you need to go look up Bethany Jet on Instagram. So you could see how she's losing it. This lady hid donuts in Bethany's house and let her grandkids get blamed for it. Oh my God, what a plot twist. What a plot twist we have. The video is hysterical. We have Johnnie pretty embarrassed on that. So I'll do the serious stuff now because we got that out of the way. That'll give her time to calm down. But so we've learned that she's been a writer for a long time, and we learned her thing about donuts. But now we got to know, most of us know her as she is now. First of all, she's a smile and a wonderful voice and a wonderful interviewer here on Writers Chat with us. Just about every week we have Johnnie, except when she's traveling back and forth on that. And she's an award-winning author. She has over 20 works of fiction now to her credit. So it can be done. It's a lifelong legacy of works that we do on that. Her first debut novel was Where Treasure Hides. It's still one of my favorites. I tell you that, Johnnie, it's still one of my favorites. And her latest novel is The Cryptographer's Dilemma, and that's sitting on my to-be-read list. I haven't got it out yet. I've got it here on that, and that has hit the Amazon bestsellers list. So I just love how she takes history and brings them alive and takes stories. We can learn a lot from her as storytellers. We really can. So she writes contemporary romances, cozy mysteries, and romantic suspense. And she serves on the background of Serious Writer Board, kind of making the decision for those of us that are involved in that, and also serves on Midwest Christian Writers Conference. And of course, we see her here, and she's active in the Serious Writers Academy and active in writers conferences on that. And the other little fun thing about her is that she's got these two delightful dogs that every once in a while you see pictures of on that, and it's Griff and Rugby, and they seem like they've been around for a long time too. I just love seeing pictures of them. So anyway, and you can find her at johnnie-alexander.com. I encourage you to go over there, and it is a delight to have her teach us today about writing romance and keeping the love alive after and love alive after Valentine's Day, but hang on to your donuts. Just want to be sure. She might steal them on that way. So Johnnie, we're going to let you take it away, and I know you've done some work to share with us, so I'm going to shut up and let you get started.
Best intro ever, Jeannie.
All writers need to learn to do a good intro, Anyway. And Rhonda's headed to the kitchen because she has a donut there. So hang on to it, Rhonda. All right, Johnnie, it's yours.
Okay. yeah, I won't say anything more about that. Just go watch the Instagram video. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I do want you to be thinking about romances. Now, typically, it's so much easier to talk about movies than it is books because there's such a better chance that everyone has seen the same movies, and we may not all have read the same books. So I am going to reference some movies in here that I hope you've seen, but also if there are movies that are, or books that you'd like to recommend that really drive home a certain point that I make, feel free to put those in the chat. And I may not see them right now because I'm focusing on my screen. I don't have a split screen option where I can do both. But we'll try to get back to that. And of course, Brandy and Jeannie will be monitoring the chat too, and we'll have everybody come back on in a little bit to to talk at the end. But right now, let's just get started. Very basic, how to write a romance. And it's not moving. Hold on a second. All right, here's my definition. And I actually did come up with this, and I'm kind of proud of it. Falling in love with romance. A romance is the story of two people who overcome both external and internal obstacles because they are destined to be together. Any story that you write, whether it's a romance or another typical genre like thriller, suspense, cozy mysteries, or women's fiction, whatever it might be, because you've been with us for quite a while, that the main character is going to have both an external and an internal journey, right? And they're going to have to be dealing with things inside themselves and things that are happening in the world around them. Well, with a romance, that story is about two people doing that, and the hero and the heroine. And so they have to overcome those so that they can have the relationship that they are meant to have with one another. So why write a romance? Well, as you probably know, it is a huge, huge, huge market. $1.4 billion in 2021. It dominated the top 10 Amazon categories, but I've listed 5 here of those top 10. You can see the rest at the link that I've got there. So number 1, romance contemporary. And then you see that it's either a main category, like number 3 is romance new adult college, or it is part of like number 4, literature and fiction, contemporary romance, literature and fiction, women, romance. So it just dominates the Amazon market. But making money is not the best reason necessarily to write any novel. So here are better reasons to write romance. It's because you enjoy reading romance. You have a story to tell, and you have heroes and heroines who live in your head and in your heart. Whatever genre you want to write, you need to be reading those books. Don't feel like you're going to be overly influenced necessarily by what you read. You want to be reading those books. For one reason, you need to be able to soak in the expectations and how those books are written, so that you sort of know how to write your book too. So, and what's been overdone and what maybe hasn't been done. And so it's just a great idea to whatever genre you're writing, look at the Amazon top 10 list or the top 100 list of books in those same categories, and read those and see what's being done, see what other writers are doing. And again, don't worry, when you start writing your story, it's going to become you. They're your characters, they're your voice, your tone. It's just not going to, you don't have to worry about plagiarizing or copying it. I really doubt that's going to happen. But you do need to be aware of what's out there, and it does help to write what you like to read. And I said this specifically about heroes and heroines who live in your head, because don't they? I mean, if they do for me, my kids have teased me over the years about talking about my characters like they're my friends and like they're people I know. but that's because they are people. They are people that I know. So, you know, that's what you want. And they have these stories that need to be told. Okay. Now, just like every single genre out there, there are reader expectations. Some people will criticize romances as saying, well, it's just a formula and I hate formulas. Well, it kind of is a formula, that I talk about it in terms of reader expectations instead of a formula. I think it was Eva Marie Everson who stood up at a writers conference once and said, how many of you have ever been engaged? And the point was, your story of becoming engaged is different than everyone else's story. And so in a similar way, romance novels are the same, but they're not the same. So it really is just knowing the reader expectations. And again, it's the same like in a thriller or a mystery. You have somebody die, you have a detective or a detective-like character who's going to solve the crime, you know, and the case is going to be solved at the end. So it's reader expectations. Don't think of it in terms of formula, because that just might stifle your creativity. So in a trade market romance, the heroine and the hero will meet very early in the story, usually by the end of chapter 2. That's what most publishers want for this genre. In between, after the introduction, you're going to have this entertaining and emotional journey. Now, entertaining doesn't mean it's always going to be happy. There could be some very, very sad moments, but it's going to be engaging to the reader, and they're going to enjoy reading it. And they're going to get invested in these characters. They're going to be emotionally invested in them. They're going to want to find out what happens. Yes, they know that at the end of the book, there's going to be that happily ever after, what's called the HEA. That promise is implicit in the genre. But how's it going to happen? How are they going to overcome whatever obstacles have been put into their way, or whatever obstacles they are bringing to the story to make this happen? Tragic illness, sure. Dying, never. In a trade market romance, neither your hero nor your heroine can die at the end. It's not that kind of story. There has to be the happily ever after. I put Sleepless in Seattle here. I hope most of you have seen it. Great, great movie. It is an exception to the rule about the hero and the heroine meeting early in the story, because if you know the story, you know that these two characters do not meet in person until about maybe midway, and then Meg Ryan's character is standing on the highway, and Tom Hanks' character says hello, and she says hello, and then she almost gets run over by a truck. But then they don't really come together until the very, very last scene of the movie. So the writers of this movie did a terrific job of kind of upending this expectation, but they did it in such a great way that we enjoy watching it. And it just goes back and forth between these two characters. And it is an engaging, entertaining, emotional journey. Okay, I also put under here age level. You do want to know what you're getting into. Your back cover blurb is going to feed into this. The cover of your book is going to feed into this. But there is, of course, different age levels. There's young adult. There's what's called new adult, which is a little bit above the young adult, all the way up to boomer lit. I don't know how popular some of those are anymore, but I am finding in, I write for Annie's Fiction, and I write romance for them at times, and their characters are now, for the series I'm writing right now, are in their 30s and 40s rather than in their 20s. So you're seeing this, or at least I am seeing this kind of shift in what my publisher wants for their audience, which I find it really, really interesting. Of course, there's also different heat levels. There are the super sweet romances to the, I put shut my eyes because I don't want to read it, romances. So, but there is this huge range, from one end to the other. A great way to see some differences is to look at the Harlequin imprints, because they have so many. going from love inspired, which includes a spiritual element, all the way to, again, books that I'm not interested in writing. I'm not sure anyone in our audience is interested in writing, but they are out there. But they've also shown there are, stages in between too. So, okay. Time periods. This is very easy. You can write historical romances, you can write contemporary romances, you can write futuristic romances, whatever time period you want, there is a market for them. And then there are the subgenres, what I'm going to call real life stories. So there's the typical boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy and girl get back together story. There's romantic suspense, which is extremely popular, very, very popular. Of course, there's danger involved, where typically you might just have the hero and the heroine's point of view and no one else's. In a romantic suspense, you may have the villain's point of view as part of that story as well. Adventure, horror, multicultural, time travel, different things under occupational, such as medical, military, sports, any workplace romance. There's just all kinds of different romance stories. You can look these things up, just put, romance subgenres or romance genres in your internet bar and you'll be amazed. And then in the more speculative stories, there's fantasy, there's paranormal, which is going to include like werewolves and vampires, things like that. Retelling a fairy tale seems to come and go, that it becomes really popular, kind of dies away, comes back again. So there's some people, doing that. And of course, the whole realm of science fiction. So there's just romance in almost any genre. I can't really think of one there's not. Romance can be a part of that, or romance can be the main genre with that under it. So we were talking before the recording began, actually, that even if you're not wanting to write a romance, it's important to realize that there's romance in almost every single story. And Dennis, who's with us today, was talking about Westerns and how, even the He-Man cowboy often got the girl at the end. So there was that element of romance, even though it was probably what we might call a subplot of the story, it was still very important. And there are relationships and loving relationships that can be, where there's also this internal journey and these conflicts between like a mother and a daughter, between other family members with one another. So, it's really good to know how to write relationships. And that's what you're doing with romance. You're writing a relationship. Okay, so we're going to talk about the couple tropes, because as you're deciding what kind of romance you want to write, this is something else you need to consider, not just the age of, your target market, like if you're writing young adult, if you're going to write new adult, or if you're going to write something in between, in your heat level, where you're going to go with that. You also want to think about the couple tropes. Now, a trope is just a story device, and they are very, very common. They can become cliches. So you do want to be aware of being too trite, but every romance is going to include some kind of trope. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, especially if we have time. If we have time, I've got a whole little slide on tropes. It's really cute. So you have to decide, are they strangers? Are your hero and heroine strangers when the story starts? And if so, is it going to be a love at first sight story, like West Side Story, if you know it, familiar with that? Is it going to be more of a gradual love story? For example, Pride and Prejudice. I will tell you that most people, readers, editors, do not like love at first sight stories. I have written one of those, Where Treasure Hides, which Jeannie talked about in the introduction. My debut novel was a love at first sight story, and my editor said, I really don't like these kind of love at first sight stories, but you were able to pull this off. Most reviewers thought so. Some reviewers didn't. And I did get dinged for writing a love at first sight story. So if you're going to do that, you're going to really have to work at making it very believable and have a reason for it being that way. It kind of scarred me enough that I'll never write a love at first sight story again. But on the flip side, a lot of people love where treasure hides. So not everyone got caught up in that. But that's a decision you need to make. Okay, you may have that the hero and the heroine, one of them is a secret admirer of the other. And here again, we're going to use Sleepless in Seattle as the example, because in this story, there was love before first sight. Before Meg Ryan's character ever saw Tom Hanks' character, I think his name was Sam Baldwin, she was falling in love with him, falling in love with his voice, falling in love with his story, and kind of stalking him. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later too. Friends, are they going to be friends who then become a couple, who become romantically involved? And I looked up this When Harry Met Sally. It's not a movie I've ever seen, but it was listed in several different lists as an example of a friends to lovers story. So I included that one. Is it a second chance romance where this couple was together at one time, circumstances tore them apart, or perhaps they broke it off for whatever reason? Now they've come back together, they're giving their relationship a second chance. I don't know how many people will know this movie. It's a Cary Grant, I think it's Rosalind Russell movie, My Gal Friday. It's hilarious. They are not only second chance, because I think they had even been married before. They are rivals with one another. They're both newspaper people. And there is a lot of ad-libbing that goes in that movie, and very fast talking, and how these two people, I mean, the actors did that. It's amazing. Just the back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And a lot of it was ad-libbed. So it's a great, great movie to watch. Then enemies. Are they enemies, rivals, such as in You've Got Mail, where we had, again, Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan as bookstore owners who are, she's got the little small bookshop, he's got the great big box store bookstore, and they're rivals with one another. But then as time goes on, they become a couple. So those are some different choices for what we call the couple tropes. Then you're going to think about the characters in your romance. So of course, I'm going to use Pride and Prejudice as the example here. You're going to have your heroine and you're going to have your hero. So it's Elizabeth Bennet and Fitzwilliam Darcy. You will have a confidant, maybe more than one. For Elizabeth, her confidant is her sister Jane. There will be a rival. For a while, Elizabeth is very taken in by George Wickham, who not only is a rival, he's kind of a sleazy character. Not kind of, he truly is a sleazy character. But she finally sees through that and turns her affection to where they need to be all along. You will also have foils. So a foil is somebody who is there, not just to add interest to the story, but to also be a reflection of the main character, to kind of showcase how the hero is different from this person. So Darcy is a very proud person, kind of standoffish. And so we have Charles Bingley, who's very affable, very friendly. And you see that contrast when they're in scenes together, in their conversations together. You see how Darcy is such a different person than Bingley is. And then in a lesser sense, we have Colonel Fitzwilliam, who also is a kind person. And you see a difference between who he is and who Darcy is. So these are just some of the like stock characters that you're going to have in a romance. You may also have, of course, if you're writing romantic suspense or a thriller, a mystery, you might have the villain, of course. So you would have someone who actually is evil. Now, I will say right here, if you're going to have like a love triangle, or if you're going to have someone like George Wickham, who is kind of, like I said, a rival for Darcy for a time in the story, he is sleazy. But in today's romances, you have to be really careful about making that third person in the triangle, or that that rival, that other love interest, as a horrible person. Because what readers would ask themselves is, if that person is so horrible, why did the hero or the heroine, whoever is involved in that person, why would they be involved in them with them to begin with? So to go back to You've Got Mail, both Meg Ryan's character, Tom Hanks' character, are involved with other people, actually practically living with other people. But we see even those people aren't the best persons for them. They're not necessarily horrible people. The gal that Tom Hanks is involved in, she's a piece of work, but she's not like an axe murderer or anything. You know, she's just very self-absorbed. And actually through that, he sort of sees how he is sometimes self-absorbed by interacting with her. So you do just have to be really careful, even if you have this other rival, someone maybe that your hero or heroine is even engaged to before they meet the person who's right for them. You've just got to be careful about making that person too awful and not giving them any depth. It's very important that all these characters have their own depth, their own goals. Just as in any story, all the main characters need to have goals. They need to have an arc of their own. Okay. So we're going to talk about the story arc of a romance novel. This is a quote from a site called TV Tropes, which is just absolutely wonderful. I can get lost in it. It's so much fun. Meet cute is a way to quickly introduce two characters and set up their burgeoning relationship. A meet cute is almost always rife with awkwardness, embarrassment, and sometimes outright hostility. So, you know, you can put in the chat perhaps some of your, favorite meet cute characters, meet cute moments. I do want to go on to say that according to this article on TV Tropes, when one party has arranged the chance encounter, chance in air quotes, for the purpose of a romance, it's a stalker's meet cute. And so you do have to be really careful with this kind of a thing, because you don't want your main character to be a stalker. And there are, even really popular movies and books out there that sort of delve into this. You have to know when to draw the line. We're going to talk about that more in just a little bit too. So here's just an example. It's probably not the best example, as I was thinking about it later, but it is one of my favorite romantic comedies. I wanted to put it in here. While you were sleeping, Lucy and Jack meet after she has dinner with his family. They believe she is their son Peter's fiance. Of course, she's not. Actually, in this one, the meet cute doesn't happen right away. So this is another story that sort of broke that rule. But we do see Lucy meeting Peter's family and them embracing her, which sets it up for Jack to also meet her and for them to start this relationship while Peter is in a coma. And of course, he doesn't even know who Lucy is. All right. So as I was going through and thinking about how to do this, and I found this article on the novelsmithy.com site, and it was just wonderful. And so I have pulled a lot of the story arc information from that article and really encourage you to read the whole thing. It was so, so good. I learned a lot from it myself. You will kind of see how it would follow a 3-act structure, and I'm not going to go into all of that. I've done that on Serious Writers Club fiction classes, if you're part of that. But this approach actually is more about the relationship. In fact, the author says something about the key to understanding what creates true romantic chemistry and to avoid the many pitfalls and tropes of the genre. So I'm quoting here. By understanding the various stages of fictional romance, you can write a loving relationship worth swooning over. So he's actually in this article talking more about the relationship and how it can build and how you can do that, because that's what we're really seeking here. As we do the story arc, as we have the meet cute, which is going to be in that first act usually, and then almost always, with those few exceptions we've talked about, and I'm sure there are others, but mostly that's going to happen then the relationship building over that whole act 2, which is, is the major part of your book, and then the ending, the climax in act 3. So that's about all I'm going to say about the 3-act structure. But we're going to go through this, how to write a romance, and do it with an emphasis on the relationship building. So of course, what you want to do right away is you want to establish flaws, because perfect characters are boring and no one wants to read about them. Your characters' flaws will be the core of at least some of their conflict. They will be a catalyst for each other's growth, because we might see a flaw that we don't like about ourselves in someone else and decide we want to change, and that can help us to grow. And when the characters complete their arcs and earn happiness at the end of the novel, it's going to feel even more deserved, because they've gone through this journey, both internal and externally. So you want to make sure they have flaws. Doesn't mean that they're mean, doesn't mean that they're evil, but we all have weaknesses, right? And then you're going to have that moment where there's this mutual interest. You're going to want to have that scene that sparks that. One of those things may be physical attractiveness. And the important thing to remember is that that doesn't equal love, which is why love at first sight stories are pretty much poo-pooed and people don't want to read them. So even though that sexual attractiveness, that physical attractiveness might bring people's notice to one another, there have to be other things that grow from that. And that cannot be the only thing that keeps these two people together. So you might have your characters be interested in each other because of intelligence, because of social status, because of wit or charm, because of humor, because they have a spiritual connection. These are just a few examples of things that you can use to keep your story together, keep your characters coming back to one another, keep them talking and engaging with one another. As part of this in the article, the author talks about Belle and the Beast, Beauty and the Beast. And he says, what if Gaston was Belle's love interest rather than the villain? That Beauty and the Beast works because Belle and the Beast learn to love one another through a slow, genuine process. So the relationship feels natural. Contrast that with Gaston, who takes one look at Belle and decides he's going to marry her. And you can quickly see the difference between what would be a stalker romance and a genuine romance. He's a creep. He definitely deserves the title of villain. We do not want Belle to go with him. So he just kind of talks about that, and it's very, very interesting. It's like, no, not Gaston. She believes she needs to be with the Beast. Another question, I sort of inserted this in here. This is not part of the article, but I just think it's so important. And if you've heard me talk about romance before, you probably have heard me talk about this, the big why. You have to have a reason why the hero loves the heroine and the heroine loves the hero. Before I ever wrote a romance, never even thought I would write a romance, I read an article about the writers behind the movie Ever After, which, as you may know, is a Cinderella story starring Drew Barrymore as the Cinderella character. Her name is Danielle in the movie. The writers of the movie in this article, and I wish I'd kept it because this was like back in 1990s that I read it, but this part is still clear in my mind, that they knew. It's like, we know why Cinderella loves the prince, right? He is the prince. He is the, what do I want to say? He's the bachelor. He's the main bachelor. He's wealthy. He's got power. He's handsome. He's everything. That out of all the women in his kingdom, why would the prince choose Danielle? And so they wanted to give her characteristics that were interesting and that would draw him to her. And of course, it had to be much more than just a physical attraction. So in the first scene where they meet, he is riding a horse that he has stolen from her father's horse, and she doesn't realize it's the prince, and she throws apples and hits him in the head, and he falls off the horse. So, it's just like later when he meets her as her alter ego, she's dressed up as a courtier. He does not recognize her as the person who hit him in the head with the apples. But there we see him engaged by her intelligence, and that sparks his interest. She's well read, and they have this little debate. And it just, then as time goes on, you just see this relationship developing. So I thought it was just really cool, this whole concept of knowing why they love each other. As a negative example, and not everyone may agree with me about this, but having this thought in my head when I watched the movie Kate and Leopold for the first time, it's like, again, clear why Kate would fall in love with Leopold, because he's from another century. She's come off this bad breakup, and he treats her very differently than any man she's ever known, because he has this whole different sensibility about how men should treat women. And it's, kind of old fashioned, but, he just, he's very different. He's very courtly, very mannerly, and that draws her to him. But it seems like the only reason he falls in love with Kate is because she's like the first person that he met, like the first woman. And so that may not be fair, but that's always what I think of when I watch that movie. So anyway, make sure you have a reason. Why does the hero love the heroine instead of any other woman? Why this character? Why does the heroine love the hero instead of any other man? Why this character? I just think it's very, very important to your story. Okay, going back to the novel Smithy story arc, of course you have to create conflict, because conflict is the core of every good novel. It's important, are we running out of time? Oh my goodness, quick. It's important that you balance conflict and compassion between your characters. Don't have the conflict overcome that compassion that you also need to keep their relationship growing and building. Know that the characters should have each other's best interests at heart, even if they disagree about how to achieve that. And then again, I kind of threw in here, but I've read this advice over and over and over again. Bickering for the sake of bickering is not conflict or tension. Don't think that it is. If a problem could be solved by them having a conversation, it's not, and that's all that's needed for everything to be resolved, then you need a different kind of conflict. Don't just have them bicker to bicker. Okay, and then you have to have time to bond. And here's different ways that you can do that in your story. They could be working toward achieving a mutual goal together. If it's suspense, they could be escaping danger together. They could be helping each other with a personal project. Think of all the stories where the heroine inherits a rundown inn or a rundown cottage or a rundown house, and she falls in love with the handyman who comes to help her, restore that house, that inn, to its former glory. They can impress one another with their skill, their wit, their compassion. They can learn more about each other's history, personality, or worldview. They can be supportive in moments of vulnerability. So all these are ways that you can build your scenes, because you're going to need a lot of scenes to have these characters coming together, to be with one another, to have this relationship grow in a meaningful, believable, relatable way. Okay, then we're going into Act 3, the period of separation, often known as the Black moment. So there will be a negative twist in the plot, but also an emotional downturn that pushes your lovers apart, either physically, emotionally, or both. So going back to While You Were Sleeping, the Black moment is the scene where Lucy is getting married to Peter, and she stops the wedding and tells Peter's parents that she's in love with their son, but it's not Peter, it's Jack. And of course, all kinds of chaos ensues, and Lucy leaves the chapel and everyone lets her walk out. So it's like, that's the moment. She feels horrible for having lied to the family, that she has to admit that she was never really Peter's fiance. It was all a mistake. And there she goes. So it's like, oh, how's this going to resolve? We know they're going to get back together, but how's it going to happen? And they do come back together again in that happy ever after. Whether they have to regain each other's trust or overcome a war, they'll find a way to be together in the end, bringing their romance to its conclusion. Again, I'm going to urge you to read the article because there is so much more in there, and so much that we weren't able to cover in this short time. But let's talk a bit about story tropes, and about, and if we have time, we'll talk about ways to switch some of these up a bit too. So we've talked about Beauty and the Beast. You know, that's like where one of the characters is very handsome, very beautiful, and they fall in love with someone who's not. The Cinderella makeover. I love this. I read this somewhere. From drab to fab. The story where the divorce wasn't legal, or the return from the dead. Oh my gosh, there was 3 movies, I think, with that kind of trope, where the wife ended up being stranded on a desert island and the husband thought she was dead. And then just as he's getting married, about to be married, the wife returns. So there's one with Cary Grant, there's one with Doris Day and James Garner, and I think there's another one. I mean, there's at least 3 of those that I've seen in my lifetime. They're kind of older movies. I think, is it Sweet Home Alabama, I believe, where the divorce wasn't legal and she has to go back before she can get married and have her not so ex-husband sign the papers, and they end up falling in love with each other again, and she marries him again, and or I guess they don't even get married, they just don't have the divorce go through. The characters come from different worlds, or it could be like a fish out of water story. Forbidden love, like Romeo and Juliet, or West Side Story. Lost memories, amnesia, mail order bride, mistaken identity, or identical twins mess up the story. A pretend relationship, or marriage of convenience. One of the characters is secretly wealthy, or secret royalty. It's called Stuck in the Elevator, or road trip romance, but actually it's like anytime 2 people are stuck somewhere, they're kind of isolated. Like it, I've also saw it as Stuck in the Cabin. I actually read a really good novel just this past week called Every Star in the Sky by Sarah Davison, where she uses this trope very effectively, where the heroine has been rescued from a human trafficking situation. She's in protective custody with a detective, and they go to his family's ranch, but it's just the 2 of them. He's trying to keep her safe. And even though it's a suspense, the suspense happens at the beginning, and it just kind of underlies the whole relationship for most of the story, and then comes back at the end. But she does this very, very effectively, where it's just pretty much the 2 of them, and you see that relationship build over time. And bit of a spoiler alert, she also does the kind of the marriage in there too. So it's very, very good. And Sarah's a great writer. So Every Star in the Sky, I would highly recommend it. An Unexpected Inheritance, Unexpected Parenthood, or Secret Baby. These are all kinds of stories you're going to see again and again and again. It doesn't mean that you should avoid them. You just need to find a fresh way to write them. Commonly, these stories are told in 3rd person. They're told in past tense, and you have alternating point of views between the heroine and the hero, about 50% of the book each. Unless, of course, like I said earlier, you do have a 3rd or 4th point of view included too. And of course, that would take some of that percentage away. But basically, it is the hero and the heroine story, and most of the books should be from their points of view. Again, there are exceptions, and here is one of the best. If you have not read this story, the series of stories by Terry Blackstock, I urge you to do so. If I Run, If I'm Found, If I Live. This story is written in first person, present tense by both the hero and the heroine. The heroine starts out the story with the first 5 chapters of the book. You don't even know who the hero is going to be until the 6th chapter when he starts telling the story. It's been a while since I've read this series, but I believe that they do not actually even see each other until the end of book 1. Basically, she's on the run and he's trying to find her. So, and she doesn't know whether he's a friend or a foe. But it is an absolutely great, great series. So also, if you're writing romantic suspense or even just suspense, grab this series. It is terrific. Okay, I mentioned Harlequin earlier, and lots of times we just think, oh, Harlequin, because we equate them with R-rated, X-rated books, but they have a ton of imprints, and actually 2 of those are love-inspired and love-inspired suspense, and they're, I think, the biggest publisher I read of Christian romance. I mean, just because of the numbers that they put out. And I know a lot of people that write for them and do very well. Here's very timely news. They are currently seeking writers for all their romance lines, but particularly for their historical line, their medical romance line, and love-inspired and love-inspired suspense. So there's the website. I will put these slides up in the files when we're done with Writers Chat this episode so that you can access these websites. So Harlequin historical, of course, long ago eras. The heat level in those go from the gamut, from sweet to not so sweet. Love inspired is faith, forgiveness, and hope. Suspense, faith-based stories about love in the face of danger. Medical romance, modern medicine. Harlequin heartwarming is also uplifting stories about friendship, faith, and community, but the faith element is not as strong as in a love-inspired story, so it wouldn't have quite that spiritual element, but it still would be a very clean and wholesome book. And right now, Harlequin is doing the Great Love-Inspired Author Search. So if you've ever wanted to write for them, this is a great time to get that proposal together. On the Harlequin submittable site by March 15th, you need to have a query letter, a synopsis, and a first chapter. You can find more information at this website or just go to harlequin.com and I'm sure you can find it. They give the different rounds when you do not have to have the manuscript completed by March 15th, but if you are notified that they're interested in your story, you have to have it done, I think, by August 1st. But all those details are on their website. Okay. Just really, really fast. And I know we're kind of running out of time, but, and I do want you guys to get on. I want to read the chat. Upending Tropes. You've got me. I hope you're familiar with this story. There are so many tropes that you can find on that tvtropes.com website. It is so fun. And you can put different stories or movies in the search bar, and they bring up all these tropes, just tons of different story devices used in the films, and then they talk about how they're used. So these are just a few that both sides have a point, but that is inverted by the writers because in this case, both sides are wrong. So the person that wrote about You've Got Mail in this thing is saying, Joe's an entrepreneur, he's not doing anything illegal, but, he likes to take out competing bookstores and that's kind of unethical. And Kathleen has good intentions, trying to save her mother's bookstore, but she's prejudiced, thinking Fox Books is just a greedy, impersonal corporation, when in reality it does bring people together, and it's a place that's community. And they even hire one of her coworkers to make their children's department more knowledgeable. Kick the dog. Having a dog is a good trope, and it doesn't have to be a dog. It can be anything, but it's kind of like Pet the Dog is a trope where you make somebody more likable when you show them in a vulnerable position. So a vulnerable situation. So like even if the guy's an enemy or a villain or a really bad guy, and you have him like pet the dog or do something nice for somebody, it can bring out a softer side and give them another dimension to their personality, so they're not just a cardboard character. This is kind of a reverse of that, and so they're saying that in the kick the dog trope, the writers deconstructed that one because Joe hits Kathleen with some pretty nasty sarcasm when she confronts him, and then he realizes later that spontaneous insults come with inevitable regret. Kathleen thinks of herself as too meek and wishes she could come up with nasty comments on the spot, but later when she does, she regrets it afterwards. So they both have that kind of moment of realization that this isn't a great thing to do after all. Loves my alter ego. This is really cute because this is not a 3-person triangle. It's a 2-person triangle, because through most of the movie, Meg Ryan, Kathleen Kelly is the name of the character in the movie, does not realize that Joe is the same person that she's got this email romance going on with. So he is having to play 2 roles here, and she's falling in love with his alter ego, and she doesn't know it. Pair the stairs is when there are the other people involved, and oftentimes they will come together as a couple, but of course that did not happen in this movie. Predatory business, the evil corporate retailer moves into a previously unspoiled area and drives out all the existing mom and pop stores, and of course then the heroes band together to save their beloved coffee shop, video store, bookstore from certain extinction. But that is not what happens in You've Got Mail. Her shop goes out of business, but we do see some good things in having the big store there. And they say that this writer of this article says Kathleen waged war on a giant chain for putting small independent stores out of business, but when she wants coffee, she chooses Starbucks. So they've also got that under the hypocrisy trope in the story. Let me see. That may be it. That is. All right. You guys can come back on. Please.
It's been a great conversation. Johnny, you're going to have to go back and read. The conversations have been great.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. Just insights, people with different movies, examples. One that stuck out to me, Rhonda wrote at one point that misunderstandings and false assumptions are the meat and butter. But then there was some discussion. People think, wait a minute, you could just resolve this by talking. Don't make it such a big thing. So there was that kind of conflict, not conflict, but there's better ways to do that, but it is kind of the meat and butter of a lot of this. You make assumptions and you go down the trail and one thing leads to another. I don't know if you want to respond to that per se. Yeah, everybody come back on if you want to. Yep.
Yeah, you just have to be more imaginative in what you do. You don't want it to be where the conversation can just solve, where that's all that was needed. There has to be more to the misunderstanding. It's true that sometimes when somebody says something, we take it a different way because of our own backgrounds, our own things that we deal with, and so that's legitimate, especially if you're writing in that person's point of view and this person says something and you can sort of have your character whose point of view you're in misread it, mishear it, but reflect on why. Reflect on what that's bringing up, what that's dredging up for them, because then you're getting into that internal emotional space. But if there's no reason, then there's no reason. That's when romance becomes trite and cliche-ish and boring, Yeah, Rhonda.
I do have a question. Both of my books now that are finished, I wrestled with how do I get them together for a happily ever after when that is not realistic to the story. So right now, my characters are in the Civil War, and he's going off. The hero is going off. He can't resign. He's going off further into battle, and she can't go with him. And I know how I resolved that, but I wondered what your idea is about well, they're getting married. That's not realistic right now.
No. What I would say, and I am a little familiar with your story. I think I read parts of it, or we've talked about it before. I think I've read your synopsis maybe. I would not market it as a romance. I would market it as historical fiction. That's actually like Where Treasure Hides. I don't consider, they marketed it, Tyndale did market it as historical fiction, romance. To me, it's really not. It's historical fiction, because those characters too, I mean, it's not the happiest of endings. They are together at the end, but they get married like halfway through the book. So I mean, that sort of ruins that kind of tension. Except then other things happen that drives them apart again, or pulls them apart. So because it's wartime, World War II, all kinds of crazy things happen. Yeah, that's, I would have the romance be the subplot of it rather than the main plot of that story. And I would market it as historical fiction, not romance. And that, I thank you for asking that, because that brings me up to something else I meant to say earlier. If you want your character to die, if it is important to you that one of your characters die at the end of the story, then you go, it's women's fiction, maybe, or historical fiction, but it's not going to be romance. So you just have to choose your genre very carefully.
You mentioned about the inspired trademark that it incorporates faith. How do you incorporate that in your face? A couple tips about how you incorporate subtly faith in a romantic book.
With Love Inspired, it doesn't have to be that subtle with them. In the heartwarming one, it would be more just a wholesome story, like, like a Hallmark story. With Love Inspired, they always have a scripture at the beginning of the story, like, like in that little epigraph part. And you would have the characters, I mean, they can go to church, they can be praying, they can be talking to God about the relationship, they can use God's word to make, decisions. And of course, a lot of romance novels are, I'm not good enough, God doesn't really listen to me when I pray. And those are sort of common tropes in the spiritual story. I wish that we could kind of get away from that and find some other, things to be upset with God about instead of those, because I think those are a bit overused. Again, I'll point to Every Star in the Sky by Sarah Davison, because in that one, the heroine, my voice is about to leave me here. The heroine who was rescued out of the trafficking situation has somehow managed to keep a faith through all the years that she went through this horrific situation. And the guy does not really have a faith, but you see it grow through their relationship with one another. You see him so amazed by what she has been through, that she's held on to that she is influencing him. So, and that's kind of a switch, right? Because the typical writer might say, oh, he's going to save her physically, he's going to save her spiritually, he's going to save her in all these ways. But in fact, it becomes this mutual thing where she is saving him when it comes to the spiritual realm, and he is saving her physically. Which also leads to, and Sarah did a good job with this, and I won't tell you any more about it because I'd rather you read it than me do all the spoilers. But there's the whole damsel in distress thing. Your heroine has to have some agency in whatever rescue needs to take place. Not that the hero may not rescue her, but she also has to play a part in that. We no longer have these stories where she just stands back and waits for somebody to come along and sweep her off her feet. So
Stronger women.
Yeah.
On that. Go. Yeah, on that way. We're running a little long. Maybe one more quick question. Does somebody want to hop in real quick? Have a question before we wrap up and say what's next week? No. People are thanking you quite a bit.
Thank you, guys.
Pam, you got a quick question?
just a comment. I don't write romance, but if I ever decided to write torrid romance, I would totally pick a pen name. So if y'all ever see torrid romance out there by Ann Gowdy, that's me. Because I already picked my pen name, even though I don't write it.
I'm not going to write a torrid romance, but I will tell you, I was one of those people that didn't really read much romance, and it sort of fell into my lap to start writing them. But I've come to really enjoy them. I like writing them. I like putting these characters together, and I do read more of them than I used to. So
I like romance. I wouldn't write torrid romance. That was
no,
a
I'm
joke.
not
But
gonna write torrid romance. I like writing.
So we're all learning as writers. We're learning we can write in these different genres and learn and grow and stretch ourselves. That's one thing neat about this field, you know, that keeps us growing and learning. And that's Sophia, do you got a quick question?
Yeah, well, one thing I'm learning and experimenting with, because I don't write romance, I write science fiction primarily. But in order to have a character that is sympathetic, I do incorporate themes of longing, where there is some love element, but it's not usually realized they don't get the happily ever after, but they get a step towards it. I don't usually deliver on the get married and ride off into the sunset. And if they do, then there's going to be something tragic that happens that tears them apart. But I don't know. I don't know. I'm learning to incorporate stuff like that, different elements from different genres in my sci-fi stories, just to make them more interesting, hopefully.
Interesting.
And they don't have to end in a marriage. I mean, there doesn't, but just the promise of a happily ever after. You do not have to have that wedding or even the engagement, but you just have to have that. Yes, we know that these characters are going to stay together and be together in the future.
Well, I've not looked at so much. I'm not a big romance reader, but boy, I tell you that I really enjoyed today, Johnny. So thank you. Gave us a lot to think about, and all the I have watched a lot of these movies, so that's also you know, on that way. But anyway, just while we've got the recording going, to see if I'm going to say this right, Melissa. Next week is our part 2 about our writing conference. Is that correct? A couple weeks ago, we talked about preparing before going to writers conference. Next week, we're going to talk about tips for while you're at a writers conference. And then a little bit later, I can't remember when, we're talking about follow-up after the writers conference. So it's kind of a 3-parter. So we're all going to share some different ideas next week about when you're at the writers conference and stuff. So I think that will be great. And again, Johnny, while the recording is still going, we'll just tell you thank you again. That was a lot of work on your background. I think you could present that at a writers conference.
Oh, thanks.
It's all ready to go. You know, I think it would be great and some great discussion and stuff. So I encourage you to send that baby out to some of those conference people and stuff.
Thank you.
And thank you for everybody being with us. Please stay for the after party. Brandy, anything before we wrap up and go? Melissa, Brandy, Johnny, anything?
Just that it was an excellent presentation, so well that most people didn't have questions, and that's excellent.
Good.
Yeah, I think a lot of people really got into it today. We're kind of applying it. Yeah, so it's great. Okay, see you guys all next week on Writers Chat. Please stay for the after party if you're here. Bye now.